Hey everyone, welcome to Logan's Mosh Pit. Glad to have you here. Do me a favor and please subscribe if you haven't already. I know what you need, some more rock and read. Today we'll read part 2 of chapter 5 of White Line Fever by Lemmy. Part 2 is called Cops. Let's see what happens next. Maybe you're wondering, with the massive amount of drugs I consumed in those days, why I never became a casualty. I did die once. Well, the band thought I had at least, but I hadn't. The whole thing started when we were going home from a gig in the van. This guy, John the Bog, was our driver. Actually, he died. About 2 years after this incident, come to think of it. He was going down the road, dropping everyone off, and I was the last one. We were in the midst of dividing up about 100 blues pills that had speed with downer mixed in them between us. I had the bag on my lap, and I had just handed him 50, and I had 50. Right then, a carload of cops pulled in front of us. Brilliant timing, that. "Look, Lemmy," John said, "we're getting busted." "Well, no." But I wasn't about to let that happen, so I said, "This," and ate all my blues. John did the same. So here we were, chewing 50 blues apiece. Let me tell you, that was foul. And we couldn't exactly take a drink to wash them down either, because the cops were standing right outside. Step out of the van. "All right, officer," we mumbled through the mush in our mouths. "What were you doing in the front of the van there?" one cop interrogated me. "You were doing something with your hands when we pulled you over." "No, I wasn't," I insisted, drooling blue all the while. But they missed that somehow and let us go. So John dropped me off in Finchley, where I was living in a house with the rest of the band. Apparently, I fell asleep, and my metabolism hit an all-time low. It looked like I had stopped breathing, although I hadn't. But I was lying there with both eyes open, and it scared the out of Stacia. She freaked out. "He's dead! He's dead!" she began screaming. Then she got Dave, and he was standing over me too, screaming, "He's dead!" Meanwhile, I was lying there thinking, what the is the matter with these people? Can't they see I'm trying to get some sleep? I wanted to tell them to shut up, but I was having kind of a hard time speaking. Eventually, they figured out I wasn't dead, and after a while, I was all right again. Other than a couple of scares like that, I have to admit, I had a lot of fun. So did everyone else. You have to realize it was okay in those days to do like that. It really isn't now. Everyone's into health and being politically correct, anti-drug and all that. But back in the Hawkwind days, drugs were our common denominator. It was the only way we freaks could tell if someone was one of us. We were always showing up at our gigs completely spannered. And like I said before, sometimes those turned out to be some of the best gigs. There was also the legendary shows where we spiked the food and drink with acid. Actually, we only did that a couple times. One was at the Roundhouse, I recall. And since most of our fans showed up at the gigs already stoned, it didn't make much of a difference anyway. There was an innocence about those days because we didn't know yet that some people would go nuts on acid, or that others would start putting needles in themselves and dying from an embolism. We started getting a few psychotics, but they were usually taken away after a short while, so we really didn't know about all that. It was all bread and circuses for us. Because of our massive drug use, there was always the chance of running afoul of the cops. But as you can tell from my adventure with John the Bog, they were pretty thick. I'll give you another example of police stupidity. Often cops would be lurking around outside the clubs. One time I was leaving the speakeasy with this guy Graham, who was working for Jimmy Page, and would later become Motorhead's tour manager. I had half a gram of speed on me, and we were walking down the road to his truck, and these two cops who were waiting in the doorway opposite the club started following us. "Let's do this quick," I said, and quickly unwrapped the packet. Just as I had opened it in my hand, this arm came over my shoulder and closed over my fist and contents. "What have you got there, son?" the cop inquired. "It's a piece of paper." "Well, let's have a look then." So I opened my hand, and he took the piece of paper. All this white powder spilled all over his black cop outfit. He looked like he'd just been powdered like a baby. And he turns the paper over and says, "Nothing on there." "That," I said, "she didn't write her number down after all." "Oh, right," he nodded. "Let's have a look at your pockets." And there he was with the all over him. His mate didn't notice either. So he searched the both of us, but we didn't have anything, and they went away. How's that for dense? But we did get busted all the time. Cops would be standing outside your house just waiting for you. Finally, we got pretty good at stashing our contraband. Nick would hide stuff in his saxophone, and the undercover cops never did get that hippie look right. You know, the guy would be standing there wearing a Nauru jacket with a big green medallion thinking he was really hip. Then you'd look down and see plastic sandals. It was terrifying really at times, but it certainly never stopped us. The first album I made with the band was Doremi Facile Latido, their third. I played on 3 other full albums, the Space Ritual Double Live album, Hall of the Mountain Grill, and Warrior on the Edge of Time. A lot of Hawkwind's best work came from the time I was with them. When it came to making the records, it didn't matter really who the producer was. Dave was always the one who was in charge. I didn't get any help, however, recording The Watcher since it was my song, not Dave's. He was like that, somewhere between Space Ritual and Hall. We did the Greasy Truckers album, which also featured several other artists. It was recorded in London at the Roadhouse on the 13th of February 1972. One side of the album is entitled Power Cut, and it's completely blank because the miners shut off all the power in England for about 3 hours that night. That's how they brought down the government. Everyone sat around in the dark, smoking dope until it was switched back on again, and the gig continued. Dick Mick left the band around this time. He got sick of all the power politics, and that was always going on within the band, so he went off and lived with this bird who was a great friend of mine who's living with Simon King now. London can be a very incestuous place. But while Dick Mick was living with her, he became a pot dealer for ages until he got busted. He wound up spending 6 months or a year in jail, and when he came out, he became a moocher sleeping on the couches of his friends. He spent 2 years on my couch until I finally threw him out. It was a shame. Mike had a very incisive mind, but prison knocked him down and he never recovered from it. I think he was profoundly shocked by prison life. He changed when he came out. He became a victim instead of a predator, and that's a terrible thing to see. But the best thing about the band for me was that we got to play a lot outside of England, and I hadn't traveled for a long time. My first gig abroad with Hawkwind was the Olympia in Paris. A German band called Amon Duel 2 played with us. They had the industrial sound way back then, and they were very well known in Europe. We caused a riot at that show. It was just kids going nuts, really, but the CRS, Riot Police, came out like the Gestapo. Another gig I recall doing was at the Lemmy Club in Italy. That really pissed Dave off. I got to America for the first time in 1973 after Space Ritual was released. I took to it from the start. Unlimited whoopee! It was El Dorado for an Englishman. You've got to understand how drab and awful England was to grow up in back then, even more than now. Then you get to Texas. You can get England into Texas 3.5 times. You can drive through Texas for 2 days and still be in Texas. And the clarity of the air in places like Arizona and Colorado is incredible. The first time I was in Boulder, I looked out the window and there was this range of mountains that looked like they were right on top of the hotel, but they were 50 miles away. We had never seen anything like that, and it was the same for any European band. Our first tour started off at the Tower Theater in Philadelphia, and then we went up to New York and played at the Hayden Planetarium. The comet Kohoutek was coming across, you see, and we were all very cosmically inclined. It came across all right, but it wasn't visible to the naked eye. Bit of a swizz, and that was about it. But we had a party at the planetarium and saw this program about Kohoutek and like that. It was a huge party where I met Alice Cooper for the first time, and Stevie Wonder was there. In the middle of the lobby, there was this big lump of moon rock, and Stevie's minder brought him over, placed his hand on it. "Moon rock, Stevie!" and then led him away. Then, during the show, I looked around, and there was Stevie Wonder again, with his minder telling him, "It's going across now, Stevie, left to right." Who's nuts, me or them? We took acid quite consistently all across America. In Cleveland, we were spiked 3 times with angel dust by 3 different sets of freaks before we went on, and none of us noticed. That's how much acid we were doing. Then you come to Los Angeles and you think you've died and gone to heaven. It's the palm trees. I remember our plane landing at LAX, circling around to descent, and I looked down. Every yard had a blue pool, and the palm trees were huge. And as we drove down Hollywood Boulevard, lined with all these palm trees, I thought, wow, this is something else, this place. And really, it was magical at that time. Young men over from England. Of course, by the time I moved over years later, I knew it wasn't, intellectually at least. But you never quite lose that feeling of wonder. As a matter of fact, it was in Los Angeles I wrote my last song for Hawkwind. It was Motorhead. We were at the Hyatt on Sunset Boulevard, the hotel Led Zeppelin made famous with their tales of destruction. The Electric Light Orchestra were staying at the hotel the same time as us, and their guitarist, Roy Wood, had an ovation, which he lent me. So there I was on the balcony of the Hyatt at 7:30 in the morning, howling away at the top of my voice. The cops seemed vaguely disturbed by my racket. They kept stopping their cars, getting out, and looking up at me. But then they just shake their heads and take off. Maybe they thought they were hallucinating. Incidentally, on the original recording of Motorhead, the one for Hawkwind, there was a violin solo. If any of you out there think the violin is a sissy instrument, you've never heard Simon House. He played like a maniac, and he ripped through that song. He did some great stuff, Simon. He ended up playing with David Bowie later on. We toured America 4 times while I was in Hawkwind. Simon House, who played synthesizer and violin, came on just before the second tour. Eventually, he replaced Del Detmar, but he and Del were both in the band at the tour's start. Del quit in the middle and went to live in Canada, where he built a log cabin with his own hands, literally. And he was a little fella, too. He built it for his wife, who was pregnant at home in England. About 7 months later, when the cabin was finished, she and the kid came out by the ship, and the kid was half Pakistani. Nasty shock, eh? I don't think he immediately put her right back on the boat, but it was words to that effect. Very bad news. Things with Hawkwind started to go downhill when the drum empire took over. That started in July 1974 when Alan Powell joined. Simon King had injured himself playing American football, and Alan filled in for him on our Norwegian tour. Then, when Simon came back a few weeks later, Alan wanted to stay because he was having so much fun, and he and Simon were mates and all that. So the two of them started playing together. That, as far as I'm concerned, was the end of Hawkwind because those two killed it between them. I've seen a lot of pompous drummers in my lifetime, but when it came to this pair, it was ridiculous. Simon and Alan's 2 drum kits were set at the center of the stage in this huge semicircle of percussive effects, which we never used. There was an anvil and several bells, tubular and the hanging kind, and all sorts of things that could be hit. It was quite amazing, really. Jolly well made sure that you knew your place. But not me, of course. I gave those 2 no peace. I'd be standing by the side of them urging, "Hurry up, you! Slow, slow, come on!" They may have hated it, but it sure kept the band going. But it wasn't just the goings-on with the drum empire that upset people. I was just too forward for the rest of the guys. During my years with Hawkwind, I really came out of any show I may have been in stage-wise. I was always at the front of the stage and showing off, and since I wasn't the leader of the band, it was considered most presumptuous. And I had started to write songs, which I think pissed everybody off as well, not to mention the drug thing. See, I was the only speed freak left in the band. Dick Mick had been gone for a couple years, and I was a minority of one. I was the bad guy, as I still am today. So when I got busted going over the Canadian border for cocaine possession, they took that as an opportunity to fire me. The really up but also lucky thing about the whole situation was that I didn't even have any coke. It was May of 1975. We had just played Detroit, and we left early the next morning for Toronto. Some chick at the show had given me some pills, and I had about a gram of amphetamine sulfate. Apparently, when you're traveling from Detroit into Canada, you can go over the bridge or under the tunnel. The thing to do if you don't want to be hassled is to go over the bridge, but we weren't paying attention. Under the tunnel we went, and we got a surprise awakening by the border police. Because it was early and I wasn't thinking, I stuffed my contraband down my pants. Not a good idea. They searched us to the skin, and the cops got my stash. They took the amphetamine sulfate and put some of it in one of those vials that you shake up. If it turns a certain color, then you're in trouble. But it doesn't differentiate between speed and cocaine. Well, it turned the right color. For the cops, that is. "This is cocaine, buddy. You're going to jail." I said, "I don't think so." But the kept me and the rest of the band went off to Toronto. So there I was, stuck with the Canadian police. They didn't even bother charging me for the pills, but I was arraigned and sent down to jail on remand. This was, as you can well imagine, not a pleasant experience. I had been locked up in cells overnight, but never in a serious jail like this one. I remember I was in the delousing room ready for the spray when this wonderful voice behind me said, "You're bailed." Well, as I found out later, the only reason the band got me out was because my replacement wasn't going to get to Canada in time. Otherwise, they would have just let me rot. I wouldn't have rotted anyway, since what I had was amphetamine sulfate and not cocaine. The case was thrown out as a wrongful charge, and they couldn't charge you again for the same substance, so I was free and clear. The band had got me a plane ticket, and they flew me over to Toronto. I got there just after they had finished the sound check. We did the gig to tremendous applause. Then at 4 o'clock in the morning, I was fired. I was doing the wrong drugs, see? If I had been caught with acid, those guys would have rallied around me. I think even if I had been doing heroin, it would have been better for them. The whole hippie subculture was so two-faced when you get down to it. It was all speed kills. Wow, man, bad drugs and stupid like that. And keep in mind, all the people I know who said that are now dead or messed up on heroin. Well, all I have to say is that at least speed keeps you functional. Why else did they give it to housewives for all those years? Hawkwind had very bad timing, kicking me out of the band when they did. They were on the verge of really making it in America when I got fired, so they must have been insane. But it wasn't because I was fired that they failed. It was because of who they got to replace me, in addition to firing me for all the wrong reasons. When I left Hawkwind, they got a guy called Paul Rudolph to play bass. He used to be a great lead guitarist for the Pink Fairies, but he was a very, very mediocre bass player. The reverse of me, in fact. And he just saw the band straight into the Twilight Zone. It was a terrible mess. They tried carrying on into Ohio, did about 4 more gigs, and canceled the rest of the tour. Dave, God help him, actually wanted to bring me back into the band, but the drum empire wouldn't let him. So the drummers and the bass player took over, and the band went in a bad direction. They made a couple of, well, they weren't bad albums. Musically, they were excellent, but they were really naff. There was no nuts in them. When I left Hawkwind, the Cajones came with me. Well, that's the end of Chapter 5. Let me know what you thought of Chapter 5 in the comments below. That does it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. I really appreciate the support. I'll see you next time. Till then, rock on.